Good morning, everyone. It seems that I lost connection to my last live, so let's hope that my connection doesn't get interrupted. Um, Happy Friday. I know it's early, so I thank you for those that will be joining us live this morning. And for those that will be watching the replay later on, thank you so much as well. I appreciate you. My name is Karen, and I'm the Executive Director for Stand Up California. And today we will be discussing AB84, a bill that has raised a lot of questions and concerns, especially for parents whose children are in flexible learning models like a non-classroom based charter. And the purpose of this conversation is simple: for you to walk away feeling informed, empowered, and ready to take action. I'm really excited to have Cynthia Rachel join us this morning, and we're giving her just a little bit of time to join us. But in the meantime, let me know in the comments if you've got your coffee or your tea. What are you looking forward to hearing today? And if you have any questions, please make sure that you also drop them in the comments. To share a little bit about Cynthia while she joins us, she is a member of A.P.P.L.E, a powerful parent-led coalition focused on protecting educational choice in California. Cynthia is all about giving parents the tools they need to advocate for their children, and she believes that engaged families are essential to shaping policies that put students first, which is amazing work. And I actually first came across Cynthia's work because a friend sent me an article that she wrote about AB84, and then I heard her speak in a coalition call, and I just knew that I had to bring her on so she can share the insights that she has with all of you. So we're just waiting for her to jump on. But in the meantime, let me know in the comments, what are you guys drinking this morning? Coffee, tea? And if you have any questions about AB84, please make sure that you write them down in the comments, and we will do our best to go through all of your questions today during our Q&A. And I know it's a little bit early, so thank you again for joining us so early on this Friday. It's a little gloomy over here, so hopefully the sun comes out. And again, if you're just joining us, we're just giving our guests a little bit of time to hop on. Let me know in the comments, what are you guys drinking this morning? Coffee, tea? And if you have any questions about AB84, please make sure you drop them in the comments so that we can answer them during our Q&A portion. I think there might actually be a way for me to request. Let me see. And let me know if you guys can hear me while it's, if you can hear me good as well. My live was interrupted earlier this morning, so I had to jump on again. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much. So we were just letting everybody know that if you have any questions about AB84, to drop them in the comments. You are a wealth of knowledge. And I was sharing with them that I first came across your work when a friend sent me over your article that you wrote about AB84. And then I heard you speak on a coalition call, and I said I need to have her on so she can share her insights on the bill. So thank you so much again, Cynthia, for joining us this morning. It's truly an honor. Before we dive right in, I do want to give you a little bit of time to share about what you do because, again, impressive. So why don't you share with us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so a few years back, we created A.P.P.L.E, which is the Alliance of Parents for Personalized Learning Education, with the goal of helping parents, one, to educate them on what advocacy looks like, how do you get involved in, telling your story, and it all comes out of this continued battle that charter schools, and especially schools that are offering an alternative to a traditional 5-day-a-week program, we continue to have this battle every legislative cycle where somebody wants to change how we're doing something. Somebody feels that this is, they don't understand it, but I struggle with it because they don't come from a place of curiosity. They come from, this is different, and so it can't be allowed, rather than, I wonder how that works, or I wonder, what process do they have to go through to make that happen? So we created A.P.P.L.E because a lot of times we were running into situations where charter school leaders were, rallying the troops and trying to get everyone together, but families didn't really know what they're supposed to do. And then the schools felt ill-equipped to know how to best talk to their families. What am I allowed to say, as a public school, as a nonprofit? What are the limitations on the communication I can send to families? So we create, each time there's an issue that we're dealing with, we create talking points for schools as well as for parents. So we really want it to be like, if you don't feel confident as a school in what you're allowed to say, then tell your families to come and follow A.P.P.L.E, and then we can tell them, because we're not a nonprofit. I mean, we don't have any money. We're just, there's 4 of us, and it's just what we do. But just say, hey, there's a bill that you'll need to learn more about that's going to impact our school, and A.P.P.L.E can tell you all about it. So if they just feel like all they want to do is say there's a bill and they don't want to get involved any further, then they can go to us, and then we can tell them that. We also give schools talking points on what they could say to their families, because the reality is, as a nonprofit in a public school, you can't endorse a candidate, but you absolutely have the right to inform your school community about bills that will positively or negatively impact their school, their educational choices, their child's educational plan. And so for those, we're really trying to help the schools and the parents know how to best use their energy, because I think a lot of us, before we got into this work, this was not the work that we thought we would be doing. I started out as a classroom teacher. I never thought that I would be speaking at the state capitol trying to save my school. So none of us we didn't really get into this from a perspective of wanting to be politically active or have a political career. It truly came out of a need because we were responding to something. And so because of that, I always joke, like, man, I really should have paid more attention in, educational law class in college. Like, I didn't think I was ever going to be digging into ed code and sifting through all of this ambiguous language. And that's what I do every day now. So it's just been interesting to see, but that was the start of A.P.P.L.E. We are in collaboration with multiple charter schools, and then also the Association of Personalized Learning Schools and Services, which is known as A.P.P.L.E. That was sort of where the brainchild for it came out of, was our advisory council. We were talking about how do we engage with parents better. So then the A.P.P.L.E. acronym just kind of came to be, and here we are until A.P.P.L.E, the company, comes after us or something and tells us we can't use it.
But it's different because it's an acronym. And I just want to say thank you so much. As a charter school parent, I know my charter school has been sending out simplified calls to action and information about, AB84. And I know in part is your partnership with that. So thank you for informing parents and equipping them to, take the right steps forward. Let's dive right in.
Yeah.
So since your article came out, AB84 has been amended not once but twice.
Yep.
And so there's a lot to keep up with, and many of us are trying to stay afloat and keep up, and things move a little fast in the legislature. So can you walk us through, with the current amendments as of June 3rd, and I checked it this morning, it hasn't been amended since then, where does the bill stand, and how is it still a bad bill?
Yes. So June 3rd was, I would say, the writing of the chaos of June 2nd. So the June 2nd amendments appeared to be very fast moving and not well thought out. And we've seen that in a few places in the bill where there's like I would say what someone thought was a neat idea, and they throw it in, and then they realize in reality that's not going to work well. And so that's basically what happened on June 2nd. Someone made a recommendation, they threw it in, and the rest of the charter world was like, whoa, that will not work. Like, you can't base it on, an average of all of the counties you serve and how many unduplicate. I mean, it's so much jargon that no one could follow it. So June 3rd, they basically said, okay, just kidding. And they, in some cases, they even went as far back as the existing law. So not even to what they had originally proposed, but what we're already doing. So they took out or they put back in the non-classroom based funding determination, but then challenges with that is that while they continue to say, oh, we put back in existing law, true, but then you added more language after that existing law, which will make it more complicated for us to secure the same amount of funding that we have secured annually under the existing law. So, and they took some things that were regulatory language and they want to put them into statute, which means that there's even less flexibility. When something's in regulation and not statute, there's you can have a conversation about it. You can tell the story of what's going on in your school and why you possibly missed a percentage threshold that was required. Once it's in statute, there's no flexibility to have that conversation. What's on the paper is, the letter of the law. And so you do have to follow that. So that's one of the things where, yes, they put in existing law, but then they added a little bit more complexity to it that will make it more challenging. One of the examples that we've been sharing is, their goal is to target fraud, to get to the root of fraud. But within the funding determination, you have to meet a certain threshold. So your salaries for certificated, so credentialed teachers, has to be 40% of your budget. And you could have a situation where you had a lot of veteran teachers and maybe they retire all at the same time. And so then when you replace them, most often people are, if somebody retires, you aren't often getting another veteran teacher. You're getting someone that's younger and they're on a different salary step. And so if you had 10 or 15 teachers retire, depending on the size of your school, and you replace all of those, step 10 to 15 to 20 salaries with steps 3, 4, or 5, that is going to plummet your percentage of how much of your expenses are going to certificated salaries. So if we have it in regulation, we can do what's called mitigating circumstances, and we can talk about that. So we can say, hey, here's what happened, this, and here's how we're making sure that we meet that threshold going forward. This happened, it was a 1-year dip. And you can have that conversation when you go to the ACCS and the State Board of Education. But if it's in statute, you miss that threshold and your funding is cut by 15, 20, 30%. And that's going forward for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the term of your determination. So it's not equitable. So you miss the mark 1 year, you're penalized for up to 5 years. And that's some of the challenges that we have is these are really high stakes thresholds. And I would argue that with that high stakes, that's where people, not because of even, we can leave the criminal groups out of this, but the people who are trying to follow the rules and trying to do their best, that's where you get to that point where people start to have to figure out, how do we make it to where we always meet that threshold? And people would argue that it's not the right way to do it, or it's not the best way to do it. And I think it's very similar to when you saw all the high stakes testing, even as far back as the 90s, when you started to talk about teachers being held personally accountable for their classroom grades and achievement scores. You started to see teachers that were fudging things because they were so worried about, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job if my students don't do well enough. And there isn't enough time, or or they came in really low, but it's not going to show that. And so you started to see them trying to find ways to make sure that their kids were all achieving. And I think you run that risk anytime there's a really high stakes issue. So that's the funding part, which I think for most people who are going to watch this, it's like, oh, good grief, this is so far into the weeds. So I don't think that any parent that's going to call and have a conversation about the bill, they don't need to get into the weeds of it. It really is about telling your story, telling how these schools have supported you, how your child is thriving, maybe the situation they were in before that wasn't a great one. How is this going to impact you as the voter in that person's district? And you can let the lobbyists and the charter school organizations, they can focus on all of those, like, in the weeds stuff. So with the June 3rd amendments, we still do not have resolution on the ability to have community partners. There's credentialing components around that also, but really, I mean, I've been telling our community partners, honestly, it doesn't matter if you have a credential or not, because they have the language in there that says that a charter school cannot allocate funds for educational enrichment at the parent's discretion. And part of that is a bit of a misunderstanding about how it works when you make a request to your school about the educational opportunities you want for your kids. And I also I've been trying to educate people, like, this is also why it's important that you're mindful of how you speak about your school in public and social media settings, because the more families talk about, you know, my funds, my money, my, whatever, it gives the impression, although it's incorrect, that parents have free reign. And, and you could argue either way, that they should have or they shouldn't, but the reality is those are funds that are allocated to the school for the education of those students. So they are the school's funds to spend to educate that child. And it's important for everyone to recognize that the certificated teacher has the final say in, is this or is this not an appropriate educational experience for this child? And I think a lot of times, a parent says, hey, I think this would be great for my child. And the teacher's in a position to say, yeah, that sounds great. Let's give it a try. Because they don't have to think about, is this appropriate for all of my students, in order for it to be available for one. And that's different, because in a classroom, if somebody said, I really want my student to have um, this experience with this science lab, and they might say, well, your child is extremely high functioning, and that makes perfect sense, but I can't bring that science lab into this classroom with 30 kids. They're not ready for it. That's a different conversation. So a lot of people think that it's just the parent asks for it and they automatically get it. It's at their discretion. So we've been trying to clarify that that's not how it actually works, that it is all overseen and approved and followed up by a certificated teacher. So yes, the parents ask for it the same way I would go to my child's site-based school and say, hey, there's a really cool field trip I think we should check out. They're going to decide if they think it's appropriate or not. So we are still battling that one, and the community provider partners, they have all different names, vendors, they are getting really involved too. So that one is one that's really hard for us. And then they still are wanting to limit the size of or put restrictions on what size school district can authorize a non-classroom based charter school. And that's a really big challenge for us as well, because we know that the size of the school district does not directly correlate to how good of a job they do in authorizing a charter and providing oversight. So we're continuing to work to educate on that, and also wanting to show how they're providing oversight, but also how our partnership benefits their school district too. What are we bringing into their community that their own students wouldn't have access to? One of the schools that I work for has a learning center that's located on the authorizing school district's campus. And during spring break, their school district had ELOP time, which is the expanded learning opportunities, and they came over to our facility and they got to use our science tables. They got to have these interactions and activities. and they wouldn't have access to those because they're a small school district and they wouldn't be in a position to purchase some of those items that we have because we have a larger enrollment. So I think it's really about telling the whole story of that partnership, how they provide oversight, how they have accountability, what we provide to them every month, the communication that we have, but then also what are we doing to strengthen the education in that community? And with that, that's better for everyone. And that was part of the charter school move. When this happened in the 90s, through the Charter School Act, part of it was about bringing together best practices and rising, bringing elevating everyone in public education through this innovation and new ideas. And unfortunately, we just have not seen that come to fruition because there is that scarcity feeling of, oh my gosh, we're losing kids here or they're going there. And instead of being reflective and saying, gosh, I wonder what they're doing over there, and if we could do that too, there really seems to be this, no, that can't exist. They shouldn't be allowed to go there. So that's a big struggle within all of these conversations. Is charter schools were built to create competition, to inspire innovation, but there has to be a partnership with the school districts in order for that to happen. So those are some of the big ones that didn't get resolved in the June 3rd amendments, and that the June 3rd amendments, while they're better than June 2nd, they don't put us in any position where we would be able to say, okay, AB84 isn't harmful now.
I want to go back and say thank you for, you touched a little bit on how us as charter school parents were talking about the funds, right? Because that's important. And going back and realizing what we've been working on through Stand Up California, we think about, no, we don't get like this endless amount of money that we have in hand to go, purchase these programs or resources for our children. We do have a system that works. And like you said, there is a teacher that is credentialed, and that it's up to her discretion based on the student. And I want to touch on that a little bit, because I think for me, the biggest concern that I'm hearing from parents is how would this affect their family and their child who's thriving in a non-classroom based charter, and particularly the vendors, because there is, and I will say there is a lot of fear stemming from information that has been shared. But I do want you to maybe guide us in what direction this would negatively impact those families that are thriving. And for those of you joining us, we are talking about AB84. We've got Cynthia Rachel, who's absolutely amazing. If you have any questions about AB84, please drop them in the comments, and we will take them towards the end. So yes, if you can just clarify that for us.
Yeah, so I feel like it's one of those things that we're working really hard to get rid of, but because they put in that at the parent's discretion part, I feel like we have an argument to say, well, we don't do that anyways. So in a perfect world, I would love to say that, one, we need to get rid of the bill, but if we don't, there's ways to clarify that within your own school's practices to really say this is not at the parent's discretion, and to move forward and continue to have the relationships that we have with these great community-based organizations. But I also know that they put that in there specifically because there's a lack of understanding and a level of discomfort that the legislature has with how we operate. So as much as I'd like to say, oh, well, we don't do parental discretion anyways, so that's really not going to affect our schools, I know that that's what they're getting at. And so I feel like if we continue to operate in the same way that we are right now, they'd be like, hey, no, we said you can't do that anymore. And we'd be like, well, but it's not at the parent's discretion. It's the certificated teacher overseeing it. So I feel like that could put us into a murky place for a while. The reality is the language that is in the bill says that if funds are allocated at a parent's discretion, they can only be used for services that are provided by a certificated employee of the school. And so we've had some of our community providers or partners contact us and say, hey, I have a credential, so I'm good, right? No, because you're not an employee of the school. You are an independent business owner. And so then I had one that even just reached out today and said, "Hey, so would the school hire me? Like, could I work for you?" And so I, my initial response is, we're working to kill the bill so that this isn't an issue at all. But if it in any form continues forward and passes, we'll be spending the next year planning and figuring out how do we best continue to serve our students. And some of that could be hiring some certificated people to come in and offer similar services. The challenge that we face is that many of the partners that we work with, they're geographically located in an area that we aren't allowed to have a physical location. So they would have to move into an online format, or they would have to drive a great distance. And part of the value of those community partners is that the students are getting educated in their own community. They're not having to go anywhere to get that service. So I think that, there's like these quick responses of, "Oh yeah, well then I'll just get hired by the school." But the reality of it is less clear. So we're continuing to fight the bill, to educate the Senate at this point on the challenges that it will pose, and just how severely it will impact the educational choice of these families. And that, we love when families tell the story of why they came here. Because I like to remind people, nobody's required to attend any of these schools. If they didn't want to, our doors would be closed. Like we aren't geographically assigned students the way that a school district school is. No one is like, "Oh, you live on Mulberry Street, you go to such and such charter school. That's where you have to go." So everyone is here because they chose to be here. And I also like to remind the legislators that it's a lot of work to educate your child at home. To be to truly be active in your child's education is not a simple task, and it's not something that any of these families took lightly. They didn't say, especially for our families whose kiddos have IEPs, they didn't say, "Boy, all those services that I was receiving at that site-based school, I just don't need them. Like, we'll just do it at home." I mean, they came to this from a very intentional perspective, and in a lot of times under duress, because something wasn't working somewhere else. They had to. They felt so compelled about the needs of their child that they were willing to forego employment, or to live with less, or to move to a smaller house, or in order to be able to educate their child in the way that they felt would actually help them and serve them best. So I always say it's real easy to wake up in the morning. I mean, it's not easy to wake up your children in the morning always, but wake them up, get them out the door, and then not think about it for 4 or 6 hours, unless they call you because they have a hole in their sock, which happens a lot in my house. But like that to me, that's the easier path for a parent to say, "You know what, they're going to go to school every day, and that's the teacher's job, and I'm going to support them and still be active." But the families that are in these non-classroom based schools, or as we like to call them, flex-based schools, they're intimately involved in their child's education, and that's a lot of work. So I think it's important for people to know that this wasn't the easy route. They didn't do it just for fun. Like, you all made the decision to come here because something wasn't right, something wasn't working, or you felt there was a better way something could be done. And those stories resonate with the representatives because they can see that a little bit in their own family. You think about like I think about myself and my brother. We both approached education so differently. And I feel like if flex-based options had been available for my brother, he would have loved it. Like I was the kid that school was made for. I was good all the time. I followed directions. I wanted to make everyone happy. I was that like overachiever, normal girl, really. And school was made for me. My brother, on the other hand, like, he would have loved the opportunities that our school can offer, and he would have been able to do so much more with his education had that been available. So I think when you talk about like when you speak with representatives and you say like, okay, so your own kiddos, do they all learn the same way? No? Okay. Do you sometimes think like, gosh, there's got to be a different way that this one could address this? Or you can tell one of your children 17 things they need to get done in the day and they'll go do them. And then you have another child that you're lucky if you can tell them two things before you have to remind him about the first one. Like when you put it in that perspective, it's really hard to deny that everyone learns differently because they're like, oh yeah, I'm the one that you can't tell me two things without me forgetting the first one. So those are important stories to tell because those are the humans that this is going to impact. And I think it's, like I said, we can get lost in all the weeds of the 124 pages of the bill, but it really comes down to how is this serving students? How is this making it any better for our kids? And the answer is it's not. And I think that should be at the forefront of the Senate Education Committee's minds is how does this serve students better? And if it doesn't, then we should not be considering it.
That was amazing. And I think, a lot of the times parents are reaching out to me and saying, what can I say? What can I say? And like you said, we can get into the weeds of this very, very long bill. But at the end of the day, I like to share that they are your representatives, you are their constituent, and they want to hear your voice as a voter and as a community member. So thank you so much for that reminder. I do want to ask you where the bill is now. So you mentioned it's in the Senate. It will most likely be going to the Senate Education Committee. I did mention earlier there is, not earlier, but in previous posts, the deadline for the bill to pass that committee is July 18th. Is there anything that sticks out to you about the bill that parents should know? I mean, you've given us so much great information, but is there anything you can think of? And then my second part of that question is, there is a Senate bill, SB 414, that kind of relates to AB 84. And what are your thoughts about that bill? And would it, make AB 84 go away? Or if we can support SB 414, let us know your thoughts on that bill.
Yeah. So as far as where AB 84 is now, and really I could say it for both. So AB 84 and SB 414 both left the House of Origin. So SB means Senate bill, AB means Assembly bill, and that means now they get to go hang out at the neighbor's house. And so AB 84 will now be heard by the Senate Education Committee, and SB 414 will be heard by the Assembly Education Committee. And so they're going to go through parallel paths, and they can't end at a competing bill. They both can't move forward. So at some point, one of them will have to step back or not pass, and the other will move forward because they are addressing the same goal, but coming from two different perspectives. So for AB 84, we found out yesterday, and it could change, but the information is pretty solid that it is going to be heard on July 16th, which is the last possible Senate education meeting before that July 18th deadline at 9 a.m. So Senate education meets in the morning, Assembly education meets in the afternoon on Wednesdays. So July 16th is when we expect the Senate Education Committee to hear AB 84. I think that's important because that is a reminder that this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. This is not, it's all hands on deck, but be mindful. Part of what I try to educate families on is using your emotional and mental energy wisely. So when AB 84 passed out of the assembly, we had people like that happened on a Thursday evening, and within 10 minutes, some people thought it became law. Some people were like, oh my God, what do we do now? How are we going to, and it was very frantic. And so we went on the A.P.P.L.E Facebook group and just said, look, take a deep breath. Again, we knew this was likely. It was an assembly bill. It's authored by somebody who is fairly high ranking in the assembly. We expected it to pass. We actually were shocked at how close of a margin it passed by, and that's worth celebrating. So I did, it was gut wrenching to watch. It was like, oh, this is awful. But it was also like, wow, if you had told me 2 months ago that we would have gotten so many people to vote no or abstain, I wouldn't have believed it. So while it was still a win for them at this point, it was a win for us too, just to see that. But everybody was like, "Oh, we're going to the Capitol next Wednesday." I'm like, "You don't. Like, that's not going to help." And quite honestly, nobody wants to hear from you right now. Like, not in the mass droves. If you want to write a letter and give your senator a heads up that there's a bill to be mindful of, great. If you want to send a letter to Senate Education, you can. But now knowing that it's going to be July, that means they have 4 weeks worth of bills ahead of this one. So they're not even going to look at it for at least 2 weeks, if not 3 weeks. Like, you'll call and they'll say, oh, it's not even on their radar yet, because they have to focus on what's right in front of them. So I encourage people to be mindful of that and really save that energy for as you get closer to that date. Definitely stay engaged, know who your representatives are, who is your senator, where is their district office, who runs their district office. Is there somebody you could schedule a meeting for? And if you call and say, I'd love to have a meeting in 2 weeks, that's much easier to do than I need to talk to them right now, get them on the phone. You're going to end up with somebody who really can't help you. I will say, if you end up talking to a staffer and not the senator themselves, that's wonderful. Like, the staffers stay in the office of that Senate office. Often they stay in the Senate as a whole for a long time, typically, and then some of them rise up and become a senator themselves one day. So if you can establish a relationship with them, they really are more consistent than the senator that's getting elected or not, every 4 years. So it's still great to have a conversation, and their whole job as a staffer is to take notes and report back. So give them the information that they can use, and they're going to take it back. And I met with one for an assembly member. It was his first day on the job, and he was just like frantically writing things down and asking
Oh.
questions, and I was, he looked like he was like 12 years old. I'm like, oh, you're just so cute. But you can tell he's like, I want to make sure I do this right. And I know that he's going to go back and say, okay, here's everything that I learned in this meeting. They do keep track of, you'll hear him say like, oh, we're tallying up the calls that we get. So calling is important. We are hearing that some people are getting a bit sassy in their calls. So I encourage all parents, be respectful, be professional in the way that you act. That doesn't mean that you can't have emotion, but remember that they're doing their job, and they're also not the one who wrote the bill. So getting upset or name calling or, all of those things, or profanity, are not helping our cause. And I think for some, if they don't have a strong opinion one way or the other on the bill, they really are going to vote based on how their staff is treated. So just be mindful of that. We've sent out some, I know CCSA and A.P.P.L.E and CSDC have sent out some notifications to schools saying, hey, this is what we're hearing and it's not helping our cause. So for families, this is a really life-altering bill. So I absolutely understand the emotion behind the calls, but we just have to remember that they're not going to listen if we start to raise our voice, or if we, we're shouting or cussing or any of those things. They're either going to hang up, or they're going to mark it down and be like, forget these people. They've lost their mind. They're just crazy. And then everything that you said that was relevant is out the window, because they've already written you off as just a crazy radical person.
Thank you for that reminder, because staffers, I mean, they're just like us. They're human, and they're just trying to get, your information. At the end of the day, I do believe that many of our representatives are going into this, trying to be a voice for their constituents. And I think on either end of the aisle, we need to remember that, you know, the staffers do build that bridge between the constituent and the representative. So I appreciate that. And thank you for touching on that, because one of the questions that I did receive was, should we be calling our senators every day? And you just, you know, gave us the information we
Yeah.
needed. So if you guys, you know, if you're just joining us right now, lots of great information. Please go back and watch what Cynthia had to say. To recap, there's still a little bit long to go. So you're welcome to, like you said, write a letter, but they won't be touching this, or it's not really on their radar right now. And I know that the budget has to be finalized on the 15th. So that might be another focus of theirs.
Yeah.
And if you guys have any questions, please make sure you drop them in the comments. We're having a great conversation. Cynthia's just blessing us with all of her information and wisdom. I do want to ask you, for people that want to connect with A.P.P.L.E, and, you know, get updates and get on your newsletter, you know, what is the best way for them to do that?
So we have the A.P.P.L.E Facebook group is where we most actively post things at this point. And I think it's A.P.P.L.E, you know, L-E. But if you also just look up the Alliance of Parents for Personalized Learning Education, and I can put it in the comments after this is done. That's the easiest way to find us. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and A.P.P.L.E is on just Facebook at this point. Where again, we all do this as like a side thing, and so our group has grown this legislative cycle. We started with like 200, and we're up to 1,500 in the group. So
Wow.
we're like, oh my gosh, okay, now we have to think about, you know, what do we allow people to post? What do we not? Where before it was just like myself, Juliana, or Kim were the only ones ever posting. And so we didn't really have to think about it. But it's been wonderful because we know that information is getting out there. And in the A.P.P.L.E Facebook group, we had a 7-day advocacy plan. So you can see this week what we were saying. So, you know, some of them were like, thank the allies. So go back and look at the assembly floor vote and write a thank you letter to those who abstained or voted no. And it's important for people to know that I saw there were a lot of people that also got very upset when their representative abstained from voting, and they felt like that went against everything that they thought they were going to do. But it's important to know that an abstention is the same as voting no. The only thing that counts is how many people said yes. And they needed, for AB84, they needed 41 votes or more to pass. But all of those abstentions, that's a silent no. And that's really something to say thank you for. And I just realized you had asked about SB 414, and I didn't hit on that. So SB 414 it was developed with Senator Angelique Ashby, and it was presented by a coalition of charter school advocacy organizations, so CSDC, CCSA, and A.P.P.L.E together. They had a 2-year work group to try to figure out, knowing that we knew that something was going to come forward. We just didn't know what it would look like. And so not knowing what we were up against, just trying to come up with what are our best ideas on how we could say, look, we are addressing your concerns without it harming schools that are operating well. So if you had to choose between two, I would say 414 is the one that does the least amount of harm to schools. It doesn't change the way that students will interact with their school. It really is about like that behind the scenes, nuts and bolts, how things work. So if you had to choose between the two, SB 414 is the one that we would push to move forward. And there's a lot of arguments that like neither of them are necessary. That, you know, I often tell people the criminals that ran the A3 association, I call them criminals, not bad actors, not bad seeds. They were criminals because they knowingly did this. They broke the law and they were held criminally accountable for it, which means it's already illegal to do what they did. So a lot of people would say we don't actually need more regulation. We just actually need people to, when you call and have a concern, we need someone to actually look into it, which is on the California Department of Education. That is on authorizing school districts. county office of ed, anyone that is in a position to say something's not right here, all of them should also be held accountable for what happened there, because we did call, as the charter school movement, different organizations, advocacy groups, we all said, hey, this isn't right. Something illegal is happening here. And we were basically told to sit down and play with our toys. So it only got as big as it did because nobody listened, not because it wasn't illegal. So that's another important thing, is we're trying to regulate something that already has education code, penal code against it, and they were held responsible. Funds were returned to the state, you know, and it's a case that people can follow, but it got as big as it did because no one listened. So that is the hard part for us, because that means that the people who are going to choose to break the law, they don't care what law is on the books, because they're still going to choose to break it. Right. This bill only impacts those of us that are trying to be, you know, lawfully run charter schools, and just making that more complicated and taking more attention away from our students, because we're having to deal with so much bureaucracy, paperwork, you know, additional audit requirements, additional training for auditors. And like, some back information on that is auditors in California already hate doing schools. And so the more requirements and more training and more mandates we put on them, the less auditors are going to be available for our schools. And that's going to make auditing more expensive, because we all know how it works. If you corner the market and you're the only one, then you set your price. And that's what it is. The more auditors you push out of public education auditing, the less choices you have, and then the less control you have on how much those cost. So that's a hard one for people who are operating charter schools.
Thank you for that. And thank you for going back and touching back on SB 414. I do want to give the opportunity now for anybody that's with us right now. If you have any questions for Cynthia, I know there was a question, does she work for a charter school, or is she a vendor? She is a charter school leader, but she's also part of A.P.P.L.E. And then the following question, what is A.P.P.L.E? Cynthia, do you want to just give us a quick glimpse of what A.P.P.L.E is, what you guys do? I know you said it in the beginning, so for those that are interested in more of a deep dive, you can go back and re-listen. This live will be safe, but give us a little quick glimpse of what A.P.P.L.E is and what you guys do.
Yeah, so A.P.P.L.E is the Alliance of Parents for Personalized Learning Education. And our whole goal is to help parents to learn about the legislative process and learn how to advocate for their children. Because I always say, like, when I go, and yes, I am a charter school employee, and I also have 2 kids, and I try to be as involved in their education as I can as well. But when you go as a school employee to to speak in front of a committee at the Capitol, there's always this level of like, I really want to keep my job, and that they're like, oh, you have to be here. But if you are a parent who can speak passionately about your child's experience, they see you as a voter differently than they see an employee. So it's really about helping our parents know how to engage respectfully and have good talking points and share their story. And one thing you really want to do is establish that relationship early so that you aren't cold calling today. And now, obviously, today's here and you're doing what you have to do, but that means throughout the fall, keep those relationships going. If you meet with a senator or an assembly member this summer, follow back up with them in the fall. One thing I do love to encourage is they love student artwork. They want to see their constituents in their office. So if you can get your kids to, find their favorite drawing, it doesn't have to be political. It doesn't have to be about, it could be a dragon or a fairy or Minecraft or whatever. Just take it with you, because then they have like this visual reminder of a student that is associated with that conversation that they had with you. And it just brings in that human element a bit more. So I think that it just helps it to not be all about the words on the paper, but about the people that it's going to impact.
Thank you for that. And just a reminder, your assembly member and your senator, they do have offices in Sacramento. Now, I'm in the LA area, so going up to Sacramento is, I have to plan for it. But just a reminder, your assembly member and your senator, they do have district offices. So to Cynthia's point, this is important for us to stay engaged on who represent us, what the district layout is, and where their local office is, because you can go in there instead of, or in addition to, if you want to do both, go to the Capitol, but also the district office.
And I would argue you'll have a more impactful conversation at the district office. The Capitol office is inundated with people all day long, and and there, when the your representative is there, they're in meetings constantly, so their staff is in and out. It's a very chaotic feeling if you're not used to it, or you don't have that level of like extroverted energy. So if you can go to the district office, it's calm, it's quiet. They're happy to see you. They're like, oh my gosh, somebody actually came to see us. And I would also encourage people, when you're making calls, it's very easy for us to grab the 916 number. That's the Capitol office for all the different people. Call their district office. Those people want to talk to you. Again, they're not getting inundated with people coming through the doors every 10 minutes. They want to talk to you. That's their whole job. And you're going to get a better conversation with the district, rep than you will potentially with the one in the Capitol, just because it's a hectic place. And the representatives are there Friday through Sunday. They're in their district, and then they also have break coming up in July after they deal with the budget. They go on break for 3 weeks, which means they're back in their district. So you can find town hall meetings, you can find coffee with a senator, you'll see little pop-ups happening. Go to those. Again, we don't need to like storm the doors or anything, but just be prepared. Have like 2 or 3 sentences that you really want to share, and then go and sit and listen. I think that's important, because the more you listen initially, the better you are to address their actual understanding of something, or just their perspective. If you go in and you're ready to have this conversation, and then you hear, oh, they were a school district employee and a school board member, then to tweak the way you have this conversation. And it's not about like appeasing anyone, but it's about speaking in a way where it's familiar to them, so that they're more likely to listen. Like, if you are a parent and all I throw out are a bunch of acronyms from education, because there's like a million of them, I could say a whole sentence without a single word in it, because there's so many, ELOP and, LCAP and LCFF, and, but you're like, okay, whatever, she's just talking. But if you can put it into terms that they understand, or if you read their bio and it says, that they have, they have a child with disabilities, and if that's your story too, then that's a connection that you make before you ever get into why you're there. But you just, I really appreciate the way you advocate for children with disabilities, or if you are in a law enforcement family and you see that they have a strong supportive law enforcement, you connect on these things that put you into a place of being similar before you ever have to address differences of opinion.
I love that. I love that. And it goes back to, having that human connection with your representative, because that's essentially how we move things forward in a state like ours right now, where,
Yeah.
we have a supermajority. Any last thoughts, Cynthia? And if you have any questions on AB84, or just, Cynthia touched on so many on how to connect with your representative, this would be your opportunity to drop them in the comments and we can answer them. But any last thoughts on AB84 and what we could do best to, move forward with advocating against this bill?
I think we've covered pretty much everything.
Yes.
Stay informed. You can, there's a lot of different groups out there, but if you're in even like the, charter school information groups on Facebook, people are sharing in there, or like homeschool in SoCal, or there's a lot of different groups out there, and people are cross posting. So you'll see things. But if you see something and you think, I like the way they're presenting that information, then go follow group, and then you'll see more of their stuff. You know how the algorithm kind of guides you
Yes.
into this little silo, but stay informed. And also, I would encourage people, don't be intimidated by the process of picking up the phone to call. It really is as simple as dialing the phone number and then saying, I'm a constituent that lives in the senator's district and I oppose AB84, and I ask them to oppose it as well. And then you could, they'll say, okay, thank you. And you can say, if you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to talk to you. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day. And, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, okay, thanks, have a great day. And they're going to hang up. Every once in a while, they might say, oh, can you tell me a little bit more about why, what the concerns are? And then you can talk about them. And if you ever don't feel prepared, or if you have one of those conversations and you're like, I don't know if it went well, you could come to the Apple group and just say, hey, I contacted so-and-so's office. They had some questions that I wasn't able to answer. Is there anyone that feels more comfortable to answer those? And then they can go, one of us can say, oh yeah, we'll send them an email. Or if you can tell me who you talked to, I'll be sure to follow up with them. But just don't be intimidated. Right now, I think yesterday's call to action was actually a click to dial. So all you do is you click the link, you put in your address, and it will directly connect you with with your senator's office. You don't even have to look up their phone number if you don't want to. It really is that easy. And then we also have a click to send a letter. So all you do is click it, you put in your address, it pulls up, who your representative is, and then it's going to send them a letter. And we have those open now, but we encourage people, especially if you're going to do like a mass call, please wait till closer to July when they're ready to look at this bill. Just because I don't want you to feel like you did all this work and it didn't, they're not even listening or they don't even care yet. They do, but we have to remember that they're also having to care about hundreds of bills. So this one's super important to us. They probably have 5 bills that are super important to them or that they authored that they're trying to push forward. So they just have, we have a real singular focus right now and they have a very broad focus. So it's just a different perspective, but save those like mass calls or trips to the Capitol. If you want to make those from anywhere in California, just be mindful of it. And also if you go to the Senate Education Committee, it's important to know, don't expect to get to tell your story there. That's not the place for it. What you're going to do is you're going to walk up to the microphone. You're going to say, my name is Cindy Rachel. I'm from Yuba City, California, and I oppose this bill. And that's it. And then you walk away. And people are like, I can't believe I came all the way here and they didn't let me talk, but that's not what that part is for. That testimony is, we call it a Me Too testimony, where you're just all standing up and saying, I oppose, or I support. And it is important, but if you go too far off the rails and you start to try to tell your story, they're going to cut you off because, again, they have a lot to get through, and this isn't the place to try to change hearts and minds. This is just the place to affirm that there are this many people opposing the bill and this many people supporting the bill. So if you know that going into it and you're very clear on that, then I think your expectations won't be missed. But if you go in thinking that you get to tell them all the wrongs of the world, that's not going to be the place, and you're going to feel very discouraged.
And it also will, potentially work against,
Yes.
us or everybody that's worked so hard on the bill, because
Yeah.
they do have rules and we have to follow them and, follow the decorum. So thank you. That's a very good point as well, because when we get there, it's just, I oppose. And, that this is why, these calls closer to the hearing might be very important for you to share your story and how this would affect, your family and your child's education. So thank you so much for that. I don't see any more questions. This live will be saved. So thank you again for joining us today and all of the information that you've shared. For those of you watching, if you found this information helpful, please make sure you share with your community. I will be dropping the Apple information for the Facebook group in the caption when I do save this. So let's stay informed, let's stay engaged, and let's keep advocating for our children's right to learn in an environment that works best for them. I hope that you guys have a wonderful Friday. I know this probably won't be the last time we meet, and I am just so thankful for you being here today. So thank you again, and you guys have a great Friday.
Happy Friday.
Bye.